Games for Change is both a genre of producing socially conscious games, whether it's console or mobile or increasingly internet-based multiplayer games. It's also a not-for-profit organization, gamesforchange.org, which, as the name would suggest, is a group that has a mandate of creating games that raise people's consciousness and help resolve conflicts. Now, Games for Change is also a festival, and this is, I believe, the 5th year. It will be held here at the New School, actually, in 3 weeks. It's May 24th through the 27th, and at least one of the panelists here will be having something to do with that. Am I right? Raise your hand. I think it's Eric Zimmerman in the middle. Two out of 3. All right, not too bad, not too shabby. So without further ado, I want to get into introducing the panelists first. They're going to do some presentations. Nearest to me is Asi Barak. Asi is actually the executive director now, executive producer of Games for Change. That was just announced last month. And he is also the producer of perhaps the best-known game for change, PEACEMAKER. Welcome to Asi. To his left is Eric Zimmerman, no stranger to this institution. Eric is really a stalwart New York video game producer, academician, theorist. I bought his book about 7 years ago, which he signed for me, which is a phenomenal tome, and he can tell you more about that when he speaks. But he had a company, Game Lab, many of you know, that was around for about 9 years. They produced Diner Dash, which was one of the hippest sort of social media games. Eric is also, as the panel would indicate, a producer of Games for Change. And then last but not least is David Martz, and I want to give a big round of applause because he came all the way from the Massachusetts coast today, and he was the first one here. Now, interesting thing about Dave is he's with Muzzy Lane, which does some phenomenal educational games, and he'll show some of the work that they're doing, both with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting as well as some government organizations. But Dave came to us by way of Terrence Mann, who's very well known in the visual effects world. He's a video game producer, and he is an observer to the PGA East board. He's a professor at Northeastern University, and thanks to Terrence, we were able to get Dave, who will be a phenomenal addition to this panel. So right now, I'd like to turn it over to Asi.
So I mainly want to give some context about Games for Change, the organization, and what a Game for Change is. And I do it mainly because in many talks, people are still not aware of the fact that you can use the power of games to do some good, and that Grand Theft Auto is not the only thing out there. There are also games around the Middle East conflict or Darfur or distribution of food in Africa, etc. So I'm going to talk in 2 hats. One is Games for Change, another one is Impact Games, my company. And to give context about myself, I came from a small place called Israel that is so small that just putting that yellow dot touched like 3 neighboring countries. And when I was in Israel, I was in a mobile company making entertainment applications and games. But something was wrong. Something didn't fit, because that was the environment outside. So I went on a journey and found another small place called Pittsburgh, and made a trip, and what I found there was Carnegie Mellon. And Chris wanted me to mention a bit the Entertainment Technology Center, which was the program that I joined 5 years ago. And this is Randy Pausch. Randy Pausch is the founder. For those of you who know, he's the guy behind the Last Lecture, the famous Last Lecture that went viral. And he was a mentor and the guy that we pitched the idea of PEACEMAKER to. So I'm coming from Israel 5 years ago, coming to Randy Pausch and saying, you know, I want to make a game about the Middle East conflict. And his response was, it's out of scope. I mean, it's too ambitious for a university project. But he let us start, and since then we continued with it and took it to the commercial world. And I'll show you a short video just to give you context of what PEACEMAKER is and some of the impact that it did since then. Peacemaker is a game in which you take the role of one of the leaders. You can take either the role of the Israeli Prime Minister or the Palestinian President. You can play both perspectives. And the idea is that as the leader, you have to react to real-time events happening in the world. You can negotiate with other leaders, but you also have security or military actions that you can take. And by doing so, you have to reach a peaceful solution while in office.
In an Israeli high school, a new computer game called Peacemaker was launched today. Children playing the role of Israeli and Palestinian leaders trying to make peace in a virtual world of suicide bombings and Israeli military strikes.
We don't expect to address all issues of the conflict. We don't expect to give all the answers. We're bringing up issues for discussion.
I think the best aspect of playing this game is that, especially if you're a Palestinian student in the territories or an Israeli student within Israel, you get a chance to really feel what both sides are thinking and get a better sense of what they can do together to work towards peace.
If you look at the video game industry today, there are so many games out there about violence, about war, about destructions. We say a simple thing: there is certainly a place for one little game about peace. From Peacemaker, let me talk about the broader picture and the broader vision of Games for Change. So the way we look at it is we're saying, that games are a young medium, which means that if you compare it to other media, and some people here, I'm sure, coming from the film industry, that criticism that video games get was also part of the criticism that every new media went through. So even books, you see this quote from Voltaire about how our books are making us ignorant. This is something that today we couldn't believe that was said. And let's look at the New York Times, 49, talking about films and how it hurts the creativity of children. Same thing is with games. And by this comparison, we're basically saying, like every popular media, you could use it for many, many things. And one of the things you could use it is to talk about the issues of the day. So if we look at books, Charles Dickens did it and was both financially successful and made an impact. We're talking about Dr. Strangelove in movies and examples like that, movies that talk about political, social issues and are becoming popular and making a financial impact. We're talking about Inconvenient Truth, which changed not only the map of popular media, but the map of the whole debate about climate change. And look at the Oscar nominations and winners of the last years. Many of them are dealing with social political issues. The winner of this year dealt with the war in Iraq. MASH, satire. I don't know how many of you know, but MASH was, until this Super Bowl, the last Super Bowl, the last episode of MASH was the most viewed broadcast in the United States. Again, the war in Korea, political and social issues, obviously in an entertaining and a satire way of looking at it. Comic books. Art Spiegelman was the first one in '92, changing the whole genre from comic books that were perceived as shallow and violent and not serious, something completely different. And Persepolis is just another example. And now we call it graphic novels. And again, our wish is that Games for Change would be, or another name would be the new genre of games. So we think that games could be meaningful too. Games for Change is a non-profit, was founded in 2004. I want to just show you the depth and breadth of the organization that are now, and individuals that are now supporting this movement. In the festival that Chris mentioned, on the 24th, there's going to be a keynote from the White House, the US CTO, Anish Chopra. Another keynote is Sandra Day O'Connor, Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, that is coming back after 2 years to show the game that she announced 2 years ago at Games for Change, to teach kids about the court system. She said something like, I couldn't live with the fact that I'm asking kids who are the judges of American Idol, and they know them by name, but they have no idea not who the Supreme Court justices are, or what are the three branches of government in the U.S. And others from the gaming industry, from the media, from foundations, etc. So, and this movement is just growing. I talked about the two keynote speakers of this festival. Let's look at 3 examples just in terms of numbers, impact, and metrics. So our courts, as I mentioned, Sandra Day O'Connor, they did some evaluation, early evaluation of the results of integrating this in the classroom. And look at some of those stats. I mean, the teachers, very high numbers of how they feel it's integrated in the class. They would recommend it to their colleagues. They would use it again. They do think that main concepts are learned through the program. And students, I mean, this is stunning. 47% played it at home beyond the classroom. Obviously, in the classroom, the competition is not strong, but playing at home, our courts, this is something. PEACEMAKER that I showed before, look at the numbers. We had over 1 million downloads, press coverage, workshops in Israel and the West Bank, strategy sessions in the US Army, using PEACEMAKER to teach or to let generals view different perspectives of conflict and strategy decision-making. Another example is from the United Nations. Food Force was one of the first examples in the Games for Change movement, developed by an independent developer commissioned by the UN. This is probably the most popular Games for Change to date about food distribution. More than 10 million players, 18 languages. They keep translating the game to new languages and distribute it to new countries. And if you think about the budget, $250,000, it's not a small budget, it's an okay budget, but if you compare it to another campaign or documentary movie, you would think that the impact is pretty significant and impressive. And they started getting those letters from kids that said, I want to join Food Force when I grow up. So they turned food distribution into something really cool and sexy. So what I'll end with is just, think about your cause or the cause that is interesting to you. And maybe in the next panel, your game will be here and we'll show it among the other games on the deck. So thank you very much. And
we're not a household name, so I'll just a couple of things to tell you sort of about who we are. We sort of call ourselves a serious game company, and we're also a technology development company. And I think one thing that's important in the space to know is we're a for-profit, so we're building and developing games with an aim to make this a sustainable business. So we've built some core technologies. I'll talk about just a little bit because they sort of inform what we're doing and how we make some of our products. And we're also a turnkey provider in the sense that what we do is someone can come to us with a passion, with an idea, and we can take that all the way through to a finished product. And for those who are familiar with games, there are a lot of different genres of games. There's adventure games, there are massive multi-online player games, there are role-playing games, there are puzzle games. They sort of all over the map, and we try to pick the best game genre or best game mechanic for whatever problem we're trying to solve. And as you'll see from the examples, I think I'm just going to show you a whole bunch of examples. We're all over the map, and that's because we have an expertise in technology and expertise in game design. What we usually end up doing is partnering with someone else that has a project that they want to get built. The one exception being the thing that we cut our teeth on in the first project we ever built was a game called Making History, and it's about the Making History 2 in the top right-hand corner. That's coming out, we're on record here, so it's around May 25th, but it should have been May 15th. But game projects always slip, as we know. That's just an interesting game for us because it started as an educational game. And one of the metrics we set for ourselves, Asi talked about some of those games being played at home and getting lots of downloads. We set a goal for ourselves that not only would we make a game that would be educational, because this is a game designed to teach middle and high school history, we wanted a game that would be fun enough for people to buy and play voluntarily. And in fact, we sold, between 40 and 50,000 copies of this game in the consumer market through things like Best Buy and GameStop. And that's because we built a game that had consumer legs as well. And in fact, making history, we expect to do very well in the consumer marketplace based on the following we have, but also teachers will get it for use in the classroom. This other game down in the right-hand corner, and I'm going to just sort of blast through a bunch of these just to give you a flavor for how some of these games are designed and what they do. That's a game being funded by the federal government, DARPA, interestingly enough, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And what they're interested in is they're saying too many kids are coming out of American high schools without, either they don't like science, they think they're not good at it, or they're just not doing well on some of these standardized tests that kids take in 8th and 10th grade. So our mission is to build a game environment that will reinforce and educate middle school kids in science and make it fun in the process. So that they don't, because middle school is one of those ages where kids either turn off and they say, I'm not good at science, I'm not good at math, it's just not my thing. And in fact, that's not true. Other countries, kids just keep at it until they learn it. So we're trying to make some of it more accessible. Top left-hand corner is an example of a college game for teaching marketing that we're working on for a textbook publisher. Just so happens, coincidentally, that Participatory Chinatown, which is we're doing in conjunction with one of my favorite acronyms for a nonprofit, ACDC. It's the Asian Community Development Corporation. And that's launching today. What it is, that's anyone who's been to Boston and been to Chinatown and walked from Essex Street in towards Chinatown, this is exactly what it looks like. And what we have people in Chinatown doing is taking a more active role in their community by playing quest games through their actual community and deciding, well, what's going to happen if we make this all residential space or all park or all business space? How do we balance those things? So this has elements of a quest and a strategy game. And it's designed to get people more active in participating in their community. So that just so happens, I probably couldn't have debuted it 2 hours ago, but 6 o'clock today was when it hit, so I'm safe. So that top left screen is one sort of screenshot from that. Top right-hand corner is that's actually a corporate sales training game where you play the role of a salesperson learning sales techniques. Bottom right-hand corner is a case study game we're building for higher ed for another textbook publisher, where you sort of build a product and move it through the product lifestyle and think about things like distribution, product placement, product configuration, price, sourcing, all those things. But it's a competitive multiplayer quest game. And then this is a game that's being built where you've got this sort of virtual fly through the body to learn, in this case, about asthma. So you get controls that allow you to manipulate things and use the right medication or the right intervention at the right time to keep the person healthy and breathing. There's this big wall of phlegm that comes up. It's kind of fun for the a little gross, but it's even got sound effects. And then this last one, I'll show you a little video clip about this. And this is being funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And it's a project that we're doing in conjunction with the guys from the Center for New American Media. They're documentary filmmakers. I don't know if anyone knows them. They used to be on 38th and 8th, but they did a great documentary called The Ugly Americans, which was, they interviewed sort of and talked about this perception of Americans abroad. And they did another one called, I forget the name of it, about American Voices. But they're great. Louis Alvarez, Andy Kolker, and Peter Odabashian. They're great documentary filmmakers here in New York.
What would it be like if you were transported back in time and you could see and feel how people lived 100 years ago? That's what you can do in American Dynasties, a video game which invites middle schoolers to learn about social history from the point of view of everyday people who lived in the past.
My name is Anna Caruso, and this is my town, Eureka Falls. It's not a big city, but not a small town either. What you need to know is that lots of people who live here work at the Boylston Mill. I work in the weaving room, running a loom machine that weaves cotton into cloth that makes all kinds of sheets and clothes. I don't know what your life is like, but believe me, mine...
You get to play Anna Caruso, an 18-year-old Italian immigrant who works in the northern mill town of Eureka Falls.
No, fancy 12. Fancy 12.
No, but this is cheaper.
No, do cotton dog. Get poplin. They're all poplin. No, that's cotton dog.
Oh my god.
You begin to understand some of Anna's challenges in life by meeting her family.
Oh, I wish your papa was still alive. Why did he have to go to work in that snowstorm?
Figuring out how to get the things you need to live.
Stop right here. vegetables just like we picked them in the old country.
And talking to people in town.
What? Do I look like a school teacher?
So did you find out what I was talking about?
If we don't have it, you don't need it. Come, take
You get to understand how hard an immigrant's life often was.
You know how hard it is to earn $2? And that's only 32 cents.
There's intrigue brewing at the mill.
We need to keep a special eye on socialist agitators. They're stirring up the
Management and labor are spoiling for a fight.
Those capitalist cutthroats are up to their own.
And you need to strategize with other students to figure out what decisions Anna will have to make.
No, I think it's treating the workers fairly because it's not enough pay.
Yeah, but at the beginning, before we went into the mill the last time, he said they were in kind of a financial trouble.
American Dynasties lets you sort out what's going on and helps you to navigate the conflicting social forces which define how history is made and interpreted.
The mill treats workers fairly. No, it doesn't. The mill does not treat workers.
No, dude, he's giving us a picnic. How is that not fairly?
You learn that every decision you make has its consequences.
We can't bring home the money for the rent because we didn't get paid. Because we didn't get paid enough.
And that historical truth is often relative.
Idiot people who are like getting 144 bucks while some people are getting $9. That's so stupid.
Who's getting 100?
No, that's so stupid.
Who's getting 100?
The mill owners.
How will it turn out?
Oh, I'm starting to have my opinions.
What will Anna decide to do?
This is getting to be more complicated than I thought.
American Dynasties provides middle schoolers with a unique opportunity to step into a time machine and to explore history from the inside out.
What are you gonna do? Oh, you're gonna give it to him.
What'll become of us?
I'm a Dale. I'm a Dale. I'm a Dale.
I like Fran.
End of the game. For now.
That was fun.
That
was fun.
It was the best game ever.
I know, I've never played.
And it gives them a fresh way to analyze who we are and where we're going as Americans.
Yeah, it's like one side, it's like two opinions. They both could be right, but one's taking one side and the other's taking the other side.
It's like
How do you believe one over the other?
You can't really.
You can't really.
You have to kind of experience yourself.
Yeah. So does it give you a sense of actually being back there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
All right, so we should take out the old front stuff.
End of the game. For now. Dun 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 dun.
Are you done? Okay. Okay. So now we have to do this.
Oh, I'm starting to have my...
So just a couple quick things there. A little farther back, you saw kids. We set this game up so it's completely balanced. There's no sort of right or wrong. And what they have to do is they have to process evidence, and they have to sort of say they're going to be in a debate later on in the game. And they have to basically support their argument. So as they go through the game, they have to process evidence, and they say, okay, I think when I read this newspaper or hear the story, that really supports the argument that the mill is treating the workers fairly. Or I find this. And the other, I just like that moment where that girl finds she finds the ledger that shows what people are actually getting paid. And the question ethically is, does she return it to the mill because it's their property and proprietary, or does she give it to the socialist agitators to stir them up? So I want to be mindful of time, so I won't run any more of that. But that's a game that works very well, largely because of the story and character development contributions from the guys for Center of New American Media. Some things worked well in the sense that we create a role, because a lot of times there's concerns about whether the kids, whether the girls will be engaged, whether the boys will take over, things like that. So what we ended up with was a female character who was the lead role, and there was a sort of narrative built around that, and that really the kids really cared about that. At the end of class, like, well, can we play more? We want to know what happens to Anna. Does she, hook up with the Irish policeman, or does she, go off and do this or that? And because there was a lot of good narrative built around that, and that's why that game engaged those are 6th and 7th graders, some of them here in New York City, who really connected with material. And a little bit like sort of the Peacemaker that Asi talked about, although this is a little bit maybe called War Maker. This is a game that teaches kids about World War II, but gives them an active role as the leader of a country. And their job in that is to really balance. It's a game, any of you guys have played Civilization or a game like that. It's a game that's sort of a resource-balanced strategy game but not dissimilar from a board game like Risk or Diplomacy or a game like that. But here it's not about luck. Here it's about actual historical data, and what your job is to sort of figure out what countries you want to make alliances with, and you know, what kids learn about this. They learn the importance of resources, and they learn about geography, and they learn about ideology, and they learn about taking care of your people. It's a very sophisticated game. This is the one that sells in the consumer space, and you can play for 100 hours if you want. So this is not necessarily one that's tailor-made at this point for schools because of the long play times. But lots of schools use it to great effect because it gives, instead of kids just passively reading about history, it gives them an opportunity to engage. And that's what this generation wants. This generation of learners wants freedom of control. They want to influence the outcome of the decision. And you know, all our games happen to be multiplayer, but they like the fact that they can compete against their peers and try it for themselves. They don't want to read what Churchill did. They don't want to, I mean, they're going to use that information, but they want to try maybe their own strategies. And when you start to own the material, that's what games are very good at. When you start to own the material, then you learn it much better. And that's, from an educational standpoint, that's what we care about. And I love the Hillary Clinton picture and the quote up there. And it's funny because for years we've talked about, you know, with Senator Lieberman and things, we talk about how games don't influence people. And frankly, our company's trying to build games. We just got a grant, another grant from NIH and NIDA, which is the National Institute of Drug Awareness, to build a smoking cessation game. So we're going to raise our hands and say we can influence behavior by giving people a game to practice coping strategies to help them address smoking addiction. And then the very last thing I'm going to show is just a little bit of a pitch on our technology. And it's not to sell it to you, but it's that many games are built sort of as an island. They're either flash games that are on the web, or they're immersive 3D games that exist sort of as a whole, sort of a whole environment. What we've been doing with our educational games is actually baking them into web pages so that they're full 3D games, but they can run in a browser. We've had to develop our own technology to do that. But we think it's really important, both so that a game knows what student's playing it and can pass all their assessment data back out. But once you open up game design and make these games web addressable, it really makes it flexible as to what's online and what's offline, so to speak, or what's in the game and what's on the web page. And that's the oversimplified the graphic. But the idea is that our games all run on a server, but they know who's playing them, and all the data from the game session can be passed into the outside world. So if you're playing a game, every time you get to a certain level, it could change something on your Facebook page. When those students are playing that history game, every time they find a piece of evidence, that goes into their grade book. So when the teacher looks at their grade at the end, they know, did they find all the evidence or did they just find a couple pieces? So that's it. That's a boring slide to end on, so I'll go back to that one. But that's it, and I'm happy to take questions later when we go to the panel.
Those were two excellent presentations, and I think in a lot of ways covered a lot of basic ground so that I don't have to. I think that whether or not you guys realize it, I think that Asi and David we're really privileged to have them here because they really represent two of the most kind of established and interesting and successful people that are making these kinds of games, games for change. As Chris said in his very generous introduction, I'm a game designer. I've been working in the industry for about 16 years. And I'm not just an educational game maker or someone that just does social games. A lot of my work is commercial entertainment, and I do it for entertainment purposes and for fun. But I also work on sometimes on the weird experimental artistic side of things too, and everything in between, which I think would include educational games and games for learning, and games for social change. I ran a company in New York City, as Chris said, for about 9 years called Game Lab. We were an independent game developer, and we did a lot of projects, some of which I'm going to show you guys. I also teach here at Parsons. I teach at the NYU Game Center. I've written books on game design, so cover a lot of bases. One of the things that I wanted to really talk about, and I think my talk is maybe a little bit more about design approaches. When you're thinking about doing a project that is connecting some kind of game or play experience with some kind of social change or learning, I think it's really important to think about, you know, what is a theory of change? In other words, what is a model that you are trying to what is a model that your project embodies in terms of the relationship between what the person who's interacting with your product is going to get out of it, and either the educational content or mission or agenda that you have for the project. So I wanted to look at a few different examples of different projects that embody different kinds of theories of change. IED was a very small, super small budget project that my company Game Lab did in collaboration with Global Kids, which is a local nonprofit that works a leadership organization for kids. We, funded by Microsoft, we collaborated with a group of high school students to make a game on a social issue of their choosing, which in this case happened to be poverty in Haiti. So in IED, Cost of Life, you begin the game by choosing what your goals are, and then the main gameplay is managing a family. So you actually, those are 4 members of your family, and you visit these buildings and are managing their health, their education, their happiness. And one of the things about IED is that it's essentially a simulation, very stylized, simplified simulation of life, and it's crushingly difficult. So almost always your family will end in poverty and poor and sick, and you won't meet your goals. And in that sense, that's sort of the way it's expressing its content. Now, the idea of taking content and simulating it, I would say is probably the most common strategy that Games for Change take. I think we saw it in some of the Muzzy Lane titles. I think PEACEMAKER is a good example of that as well. That's the idea is that you take subject matter and you procedurally represent it, right? That you're going to present a system that someone interacts with and can play with. I think that as long as you choose a topic which is appropriate for a kind of system-oriented simulation, then that's great. So for example, looking at a complex network of relationships between Israel and Palestine is appropriate. I think what games are not good at is actually conveying information, right? There's linear media are probably better at just conveying pure facts. And instead, games are much better for letting people play with concepts. And interact with systems. And that leads me to another model for thinking about the relationship between games and learning, other than saying that you're going to simulate or represent sort of, let's say, curricular content in a game. In fact, in the future, it's probably going to be less important to know a particular fact than it is to be able to retrieve facts and be able to research them and be critical about that process as you're doing so. So some of my academic research in the last few years have been around gaming literacy, which is the idea that with the rise of the internet and sort of increasing influence of digital technologies in our lives, there are new and emerging forms of literacies. In other words, what it means to be literate. And successful in our society. Literacy, of course, means both understanding and creating meaning. Traditionally, reading and writing, and then it's been expanded to thinking about media literacy, visual literacy, but there are other kinds of literacy skills that I think have more to do with understanding how systems work, for example. That are going to be increasingly important in the future. And one of the best ways of learning about systems is by playing and especially creating games. So this is a screenshot from GameStar Mechanic. That is a project that was funded by the MacArthur Foundation that my company Game Lab started. And since my company closed, it's been handed off to our nonprofit sister organization I helped start called the Institute of Play. As well as E-Line Media here in New York City. So in GameStar Mechanic, the player is cast as a game designer, and you actually create and play small levels within a sort of role-playing experience. So you can see you have an inventory of stuff on the left. You can drag it into an editing window on the right. You can double-click on a unit, and it pops open a window with little sliders that you can change. And it's actually a remarkably usable tool for creating games. GameStar Mechanic is also set within a whole narrative universe. It's sort of anime steampunk world that is trying to be part of pop culture that's familiar with kids as well. So GameStar Mechanic really embodies the idea of not just playing games, but creating them. And not games in the service of expressing content or conveying information, but games in the service of those kinds of literacies, those systems literacy and procedural literacy that have to do with what I feel are emerging literacies that are going to be essential for people in the coming century, but that aren't being addressed in schools, which are being dragged backwards into the 19th century by some of Bush's standardized testing regimes and that sort of thing. So that's another approach. Another thing I want to talk about in terms of how games can relate to its topic is idea of subversive play. So, like I said, I have a lot of interests as a game maker. Some of them are more traditional educational, and some of them are more thinking about games in a larger sense. One of the interesting things about play is that, if games really are a great cultural form of systems, right? That's why GameStar Mechanic teaches those literacies, because there is no other cultural form that is as intrinsically sort of mathematical and systemic as games, even though at the same time games can tell a story and be aesthetic objects and bring people together for social experiences. At the same time, play is that experience within a structure where we're not really using the structure for its utilitarian purpose. For example, if I was going to play with this pen, I might twiddle it like this. I might pretend that it's a gun and shoot Aussie, even though he's tweeting or something on his phone, so he doesn't know what I'm doing right now. Or I may. Right, okay, I may talk to this pen and say, oh, hi, pen, how are you? Oh, I'm doing fine, right? So why are these things playful, right? Why do they make you smirk and maybe roll your eyes at me? Well, because play is, to play with something is to use it in ways that it's not specifically intended to, right? So when I'm pretending that it's something else, or I'm playing with the idea that we know that a pen is a pen, but yet when we play with it, it can become something else. It can become a gun, or it can become a character, for example. So the idea of subversive play is that you can play with existing structures, and games often do that in interesting ways. So I'll give you some examples. So this is the only non-game example I have. This is a lead guitarist from Rage Against the Machine, and what he scrawled on his guitar was actually from a project I did in graduate school a couple decades ago called Arm the Homeless, where we created a fake organization as a media hoax to give firearms to homeless people. So that was very wildly successful media hoax, and it reached a kind of national, international scale. But in any case, that we're playing with existing structures both with media and with pop culture. This is an example of a game I designed for an office where I was working, making games here in New York City called Suspicion. And I guess I won't get into the details except to say that it was a game where you didn't really know who else was playing at the start of the game, and it really played with the power relationships in the office, so that you might end up really fucking with your boss, for example, and sort of sort of tricking them and getting all their cards from them. So this was a game that played with and sort of inverted some existing power relationships in the office. I've also done a ton of games for conferences. This was a conference I was here at the New School University called Power at Play, and it was less of a game than kind of a social play experience where you got a bunch of cards at the beginning of the game, and as you can see, the cards can make you do things like tell a secret to someone or take an object from them. So these examples of subversive play basically are thinking about play, again, not as conveying information, which was the first example, or even if done well as a system like the games that these guys do, not thinking of games as the embodiment of a set of literacies, but in this case, one of the interesting, powerful things that games can do is they can literally act sort of like parasites or playful interventions into existing social structures, which in terms of a games for changes can be very exciting. So we can think about the way that games are kind of natural ways to intervene in cultural contexts. The last couple of examples are thinking of games of a cultural field really related to what I've been saying about games being subversive. Backchatter is a game that I did with a collaborative called Local Number 12, and it's a game that's designed for Twitter and the web. So this was a game that we did designed to be played at conferences, and this is what it looks like while you're playing online. Very straightforward website. The way that it works is that at every conference, especially these kind of digital media conferences these days, there's a Twitter back channel where people are tweeting at a conference and saying, there's probably one right now, for this talk, oh, when is this thing going to be over? I want some more wine, or quoting the person that's up there. Well, this game takes that discursive field that takes place during a conference as its field of play. So you're actually betting on words that you think are going to be popular in tweets about your conference. In other words, tweets that are marked with the hashtag of the event that you're attending. And each round of the game is keyed to the schedule conference. And there's a couple of twists, like the idea that it's like betting on horse racing. The more people that bet on a word, the less valuable it is. So the really obvious words, which may appear very often and give you points each time they appear, will be worth less. So it takes a lot of social smarts and cultural smarts to play this game well, right? So this is an example where it's a game in which the field of play is a cultural field itself. And playing the game well means understanding your current social context and kind of strategizing within it. I'll show one last game because another thing I want to say is that for me, play is not just something that happens on a computer. This is a project I did recently with architect Natalie Pozzi called 16 Tons, and it's named after the Tennessee Ernie Ford. You load 16 tons, and what do you get? So it's really about debt bondage and debt bondage and working in a coal mine and in a company town, I should say. And it's a game for 4 players, and it involves these heavy pieces that are cut from steel pipe. And it's a strategy game that's very simple. But layered on top of that strategy game is that you actually take money out of your wallet and use it to bribe other players when you play. So this is a game designed for a gallery that in a weird way turns the gallery context into some kind of like sort of betting circle or a kind of a betting pit. And it you know, in some ways it's a little bit subversive in that context. At the same time, it's a fun, well-crafted game that's enjoyable to play. And it also addresses, but in a kind of oblique way, issues about debt bondage, and you actually bribe other players during the game to do your work for you. So on their turn, you pay them to do your work. So it inverts a lot of things that we think about games. For example, the idea that it's easy to play a game, because these are very heavy pieces that are difficult to move, these big steel pieces. It also inverts the idea that on my turn, I get to do something. Well, on my turn, people are paying me, and I have no choice but to work for them in the rules of the game. So again, just an idea of the ways that games can, in addition to the sort of conventional way that we think about games and social change, games can playfully address a lot of social issues. You know, I guess I just want to close with one thought, which is that you know, there's all kinds of ways to do social media, whether it's in games or film, and I really appreciated some of the examples that Aussie put out there, like R. Crumb's Mouse, for example, the graphic novel about the Holocaust. And you know, I want to say that I think that there's a lot of interest in games and social issues these days, in games and learning. And the cautionary note I want to end on is that much of that work is incredibly didactic and very flat-footed. And I think that, you know, there's didacticism doesn't make for good pop culture. It often doesn't make for good political culture or learning, and it certainly doesn't make for good games. So I think that you know, what one should do with a medium is to really be playful and embrace the fact that sometimes games are at their best when they're ambiguous, when they intervene, and when they're subversive. And I would love to think more about and invite everyone working within games to think more about using those qualities of games as they move forward and address these social issues. Because just as these literacies that I mentioned are going to be the defining ways of thinking and being successful and communicating and interacting with each other and with media in the coming century, games are going to be a model for the way that we spend our leisure time. And I think that the way that the moving image was the dominant form of culture in the previous century, I think that games are going to be a model for the dominant forms of culture in the coming century. And it's up to us to really figure out the best ways to connect this incredibly ancient and newly important cultural form with the social issues that I think it needs to be connected with. Thank you very much.
A couple of questions, and these are really mostly questions for the whole panel, but I'll get into some specific questions as well. But you know, I guess, you know, one of the things that I thought was really interesting about, you know, all the presentations is that, you know, there wasn't specific discussion about different platforms, and I wanted the panelists to talk about different platforms. I mean, Dave, I know that you had mentioned earlier that you guys are involved in a lot of multiplayer games. So you know, sort of a two-part question for the panelists. You know, do platforms necessarily matter for games for change, number one, and number two, what's the role of the MMORPG, or the massively multiplayer online role-playing game in games for change? So I don't know, Dave, you want to take that one first?
Sure. For us, I say that, you know, the browser is the console. That's the most ubiquitous environment that we think can get to everyone in a networked way, and it has the benefit of, to the extent that you know, all the internet computers are networked, has the availability for multiplayer. And as far as multiplayer, we focus on what I would call moderate multiplayer, unless you're doing a social experiment that involves thousands of numbers of people. I think moderate multiplayer allows you to have either more relationships or more structured environments.
Right.
And I think if you're going to convey a message in an intentional game or a persuasive game or a serious game, it's important to have some structure so you can at least impart what you're trying, the message, and then be able to measure that. And thousands of players, structure and measurement usually get tossed out the window.
Yeah. Well, Eric, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think selecting the platform for a game is incredibly important. As compared to, and this is I don't mean to over-mention the moving image, but if you make a video short, for example, you could put it online, you could submit it to film festivals, it might end up on television, it could be shown in a theater, someone can watch it on their laptop. With games, it's not so easy to move from platform to platform. Just because you've made a game that can be played in a browser, you can't just put it on an iPhone and you can't just put it on an Xbox. Those are really totally separate projects. So in a sense, when you're deciding the platform for your game project, you're making a huge decision because typically the budgets are a lot smaller for game projects that are not completely commercial projects as they are for Games for Change. And so you have to be very, very tactical and strategic in choosing the platform that has to do with who it's for. Is it going to be played in a classroom or is it intended to be at home? What kind of market are you competing with other school products or with commercial products? And how does it fit into the lifestyle of your players? So all of those things are incredibly important. And also what's best suited for the kind of game that you want to make. I think that the good news is that as compared to even 3 or 4 years ago, there's a much better chance of outside of the school market of getting a small-scale game made, distributed, and independently, and to actually potentially even make money from it. So there's a host of new platforms that include everything from downloadable games, online platforms like Steam and Xbox Live Arcade, to iPhone and social network games that have bona fide revenue models that can actually generate, I mean, revenue for you. 10 years ago, you really were talking about if you wanted anything but the PC platform, you were talking about spending millions of dollars and trying to get through Nintendo or Sony's very tight restrictions on gatekeeping on what could go on that platform. So the good news is that there's a lot of platforms now for small independent games, whether they're for commercial or educational or social change intent.
Yeah, Asi, what's your take on this?
So I agree with Eric on the diversity, and definitely, especially in the last 1 or 2 years, with the iPhone, with Facebook, we see an explosion of new ways to get to your audience, and also cheaper. I mean, if we talked in the past about console games that were very expensive and are still very expensive to make, now you can make an iPhone game or a Facebook game in budgets as low as $50,000. At the same time, the flip side is that that's the complexity of the media. We're talking about movies. At the end of the day, we're using more the same technology, unless you're going to do Avatar. In games, we're talking about a choice that Eric talked about of a platform that is crucial. And what we're trying to usually do with people that approach Games for Change, whether individuals or foundations or nonprofits, we're telling them that's not the first choice to make. First of all, tell me what you're trying to do, who is your audience. I mean, are you talking to college students or college people or college-age people outside the school? Then maybe Facebook is your audience and your platform. Are you trying to talk to kids? They're not on Facebook. I mean, maybe just like Eric mentioned, the context is the classroom, and then you have to target it to that platform that is going to be used in schools. If your target fits the iPhone, then that might be the platform of choice. But again, the question should be first and foremost what you're trying to do. The last thing about the multiplayer games, I think that's a great opportunity that wasn't cracked yet. If you see what Zynga is doing with the Facebook games, I mean, that's something completely new. The amount of time people spend there, it's not a one-time thing. People work on their farm for, it looks like ages, but it's months and years. And we're talking about a huge opportunity. Think that you could turn that activity and that investment into donations, into supporting a cause, into even experimenting with a new form of a game. And again, that's a big opportunity that wasn't cracked yet.
Yeah, and you mentioned Zynga. I think that, you know, really the next question is so where do we go from here in terms of social networking? I mean, you know, Eric, you mentioned, you know, Backchatter and there are various other games, and obviously, Dave, there are probably hooks for social media within what you're doing, and obviously, Aussie, you know, the same with Peacemaker and other games like that, or playing the news. But, you know, how is that, you know, figuring into your strategy right now? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about it, Aussie, but in terms of really bringing Games for Change into networks, I mean, whether it's a viral game or something that's an adjunct to another platform.
There is the experience of the game, and there is the real-world action. Darfur is Dying is one of the famous games that were made by a group out of USC, distributed by MTVU. And it was a game that you could play a character in Darfur, and then you could send letters to Congress members or the president. Tens of thousands of letters were sent, but there was a wall between the experience and the action. And I think that what those new forms of gaming are opening for us is a tighter integration, a smoother integration of the real world into the game. And if we could do something that inside the game, in the game mechanics, you could do things that have actual impact on the world, that could be amazing.
Oh, good. Now I can get to disagree with Aussie a little bit. I think
controversy, please.
I mean, to me, the idea that by playing a game, you're also writing a letter to a congressperson, or you're actually solving the problem itself through the play of the game, to me is, I mean, perhaps it can be done, but it's a little bit of a pipe dream. It's sort of like saying, well, by playing this medical simulation game, we're not just going to make you excited about medicine, but we're actually going to find the cure for cancer. So I feel that there's nothing wrong.
Isn't that crowdsourced medicine? Isn't that the new thing? You like that?
There's actually nothing wrong with doing a work which simply takes seriously an important social or human issue as its subject matter or content, whether you're, you know, in any whatever strategy that is. But I think that it's what I see too often when I've been working with nonprofit organizations is a desire that Aussie is talking about, which is that we don't want this game to be about a subject. We don't want it to sort of virally spread important information about an issue or get people involved in some way, but we want it to actually also solve the problem. And I feel that that's just loading too much to bear on the shoulders of games that to do policy work, to do activism work, and to also do everything that a social issue game is trying to do, which is invent new kinds of games on subjects that have never been represented within games before. So it often ends up, what you often end up with is something where either the game ends up being very, very watered down, so it's like a lot of Jane McGonigal's work, which is essentially sort of creative writing exercises and social networking, as opposed to a bona fide game, right? So, but if that's okay, if your interest is not in actually making a good, fun game, then that's all right. But I just want to caution against that, because I think that it can take it too far.
I mean, I understand what you're talking about, and that could be the extreme. I mean, I'll give one example that Zynga actually did. We're talking about commercial company. I mean, no one could argue that they're not really making every effort they could to make money. And they did something for Haiti. And for a week or two, they sold those seeds that if you bought them, the money went straight to the United Nations and supporting Haiti. They made in 1 week $1.5 million that they contributed to the cause. So they didn't change the game. I mean, the game was the same game. It was about farming and about growing your farm, personalizing it, etc. They changed one feature, even for a very short period, but they did this tie-in of real-world impact into the game experience. So I'm not talking about like the whole game should be around it, but like get it in somehow, get it into the mechanics.
Yeah, Dave, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I just think I'd come back to what you said before about the hooks. And I said that when I spoke before, that historically games have been this sort of self-contained environments. I think once you enable them to your social network, you have an opportunity to connect to the outside world. And whether it depends, it goes back to what the original intent you know, for us, a lot of times there's a profit motive at the end of the day. So we care about sustainability. We care about people coming back. And if you have a game that builds some community around the activity, and then you can tie that into a social network, then you have a reason for people to come back, and that builds in that cycle of.
Well, that's a very interesting example that you had, particularly, and by the way, that was great footage of the kids interacting. It was just fantastic. I mean, as an educational and Games for Change, you know, company. I mean, you're both a publisher as well as a technology provider, really. I mean, producing on that level in terms of where you go from the classroom, I think, is very, very interesting, and it fits into, you know, the whole idea of change. And I mean, we're 15.5 months into the Obama administration. Eric, you know, made a reference to the predecessor's rather failed educational policies. But, you know, Arne Duncan has, I think anyone would agree, as Secretary of Education, has made a very pointed effort to shake things up. So how do you see Games for Change playing in this new landscape? Because it seems like this should be the sweet spot, right?
Well, I think Eric concluded by saying it's the medium, it's the cultural medium going forward. And certain things, you know, television was around a long time before Sesame Street sort of figured out the model of, you know, what is it going to take to make this both entertaining and educational. And I think, you know, serious games and Games for Change are constantly, you know, you have to, the perpetual challenge that we have is how do you get the point across without sucking the fun out of the game? Yeah. And I think that's you know, that's the real challenge for good designers, is not to make it too pedantic and not to make it, you know, Eric, you also mentioned that, you know, the game may not be the right way to disseminate information. You know, there's linear medium are fine for that. You know, textbooks are fine, and from our perspective on giving you the information in the first case. But when you want empathy, or when you want people to try it for themselves, or experience, or immersion, or frustration, that's when that application of a gaming environment. And I think we need to focus on doing that, giving people hands-on experience, you know, just as Peacemaker does. You can read all day about negotiating an environment, but until you get in a situation and someone says something and does another thing, and that causes you to lose face, you know, until you feel that viscerally, then you're not going to get that same experience. And I think games are very effective at giving you that emotional, visceral connection.
Well, and back to, you know, the World War II game, which I think is fascinating, because you can layer so many things on top of that, whether it's localized information, different languages, or obviously different perspectives. So, you know, I mean, meaning non-U.S.
Oh yeah, if you read the forums on our, you know, about the game, there are these. We've had to shut a couple off because, you know, you get Russians and Poles and Chinese and Japanese. I mean, it's incredible.
Yes, if you have relatives from the Eastern Bloc, as I do, it's a slightly different story.
Yeah.
Yes, D-Day is not a time for great celebration. You know, it's like, you know, celebrating Columbus Day in a Native American reservation. You know, because all three of you have worked in some capacity with either government organizations or NGOs, which are non-government organizations, for those who don't know that, TLA, three-letter acronym. So I want you to all just, and I'll start with Asi first, we'll go down the line this way. You know, I mean, do you approach them? Do they approach you? What are some of your learnings for those out here who want to know, you know, what to do, whether it's a school board or it's, you know, the United States Army?
Let's say the majority of the time it was about convincing and about advocating and about promoting the field. And there was a lot of convincing to do, and Suzanne Segerman and others that founded this organization were working very hard on doing just that. In the last year or two, there's a change, and it almost seems that we convinced a lot of people. So the White House, you know, the representative from the White House is coming to the conference, is coming because they have a gaming initiative. Sandra Day O'Connor has a gaming initiative. So we turned from convincing into helping or supporting. So most of the people come to us. We're not, at this point, we're not trying to convince or go to other people. And they're coming to us, but we do tell them that it's a very complex area. And the funding is a challenge, and we're trying to work with them on that.
Eric, what can you impart in terms of dealing with NGOs and government?
There's definitely been a shift. I mean, just about a month ago, I was giving a talk at Long Island University because they were trying to promote this whole set of summer courses around games. So it's not Egyptian history, it's studying the games that ancient Egyptians played, for example. And that's their whole kind of motif to get students to study there during the summer, is the summer of games. And the vice president of the university was there saying, games are the most important way that we learn and learn to be social. And it's amazing, I mean, that you know, even literally a few years ago, generally in academia, people were turning up their noses to games for whatever reason, as well as in many other circles. So it's great that games are getting more and more acceptance, in part because gamers are getting older. In terms of, and you know, and are in.
Are you saying that gamers are mellowing?
No, I'm just saying
they've gone from first-person shooters to Peacemaker. Is that it?
It's like the generation,
right? As both the people that grew up playing games take over the workforce, and more games, such as Facebook games, are being played by people that are older and older. There are fewer and fewer people who actually don't play video games. Most of the fear and anxiety expressed about games is done so by people that don't play them. So that's kind of my point, is that I think time is on our side in that sense. A Pew Internet study recently showed that I think 97% of American teenagers play games. So virtually everyone, 99% of men and 96% of women, or something like that. So it's virtually everyone is playing games, at least in this country. In terms of working with foundations, I would say that it's very tricky. We were a commercial game company, and we worked mostly with commercial partners, and working with someone like a foundation requires a very specific kind of bedside manner with them and reporting with them. They often require academic partners. So I would just say that it's really about bringing in the right partners. There's many opportunities for funding. If you look at the government, government grants around National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, even the Humanities Foundation. I'm not in the arts yet, unless you're doing something educational. But there's a lot in the Defense Department. There's a ton of money going in, but you really need to you need to go into those situations with someone that really knows how to get those grants, and often getting a PhD attached to an application and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of money and opportunities out there. There's more every year.
Dave, what about your take on this?
Yeah, I was thinking about, having been doing this for 6 years now, I keep quotes sort of on my desk sometimes of the things people say to me on the phone. And about 5 years ago, a North Carolina teacher, she said, "Games, get thee behind me, Satan." So I wrote that one down and left that on the desk. But I don't hear that so much anymore. And in fact, the participatory Chinatown game is going to be presented at the White House. I'm not sure exactly to whom, next Wednesday. So I think there is more acceptance. And we've done work for ourselves, we've done work for large corporate textbook publishers, we've done work for nonprofit philanthropic organizations, and we've done work for the government. And each one is different, and a lot of it gets down to what their needs are, what the budget is, what the timing is. Very few of them have been very sophisticated about what's the sustainability plan. Many of these entities are happy funding research, and they'll give you some money to get the thing going, but no one really knows, okay, what's going to happen? How the hosting costs going to get paid in our environments? How is the new content development? How do you keep it fresh? I mean, one of the things that frustrates me about some of the awesome games that I've seen put up here today is that they haven't been carried forward, even though they're great game mechanics, Food Force and things like that. They're downloaded millions of times, but they don't get refreshed because no one put a budget in there to rebuild it. I think that's an important thing, both for the people on the funding side and for anyone who's developing to concentrate on. And none of those, if you're getting philanthropic money or government money, it's sort of not for the faint of heart. You have to have patience, and it's going to take 3 or 4 times longer than you expected it to, because either politics or governmental bureaucracies will intervene. So it's really important to sort of plan that into the process, the development process.
Yeah. One more thing that I want to mention in terms of people that are interested in making games for change, we get more and more inquiries from other media people. Filmmakers that want to make transmedia project, extend the cause of their movie into a game, and even.
Can you give examples here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to Toronto actually for Hot Docs this week.
Okay, yeah.
And there were, I don't know if someone was at the Good Pitch last week, but I mean, there is a movie about the World Cup in South Africa, trying to make a game around it as well, and book writers. I mean, Random House just started a gaming department. So
they've been there before, so hopefully, hopefully they will learn.
Second one.
Yes, exactly. It's not just CD-ROMs anymore. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, the idea that they see this media as another way to engage in the audience.
And I want you to talk a little bit about where you see serious games on mobile. And again, Asi, you touched a little on that, and I think all of you have made some references. But I would think that given obviously the installed base, the embedded base, and the fact that within 3 or 4 years, the majority of mobile devices, what we call cellular,
Right.
carrier-backed phones, will be smartphones. Talk a little bit about that trajectory.
Actually, what we see is an opposite trend in the sense that people are trying more and more to direct games for change or serious games to the developing world rather than create awareness in the first world, in the US or Europe. So we got a few projects that we're working on now on mobile phones in the developing world, and then you basically go back a generation or even two in terms of the mobile devices. At the same time, we're talking about billions of devices. I mean, millions and crazy numbers. Just an example, one Indian company that is going to be presenting at Games for Change, ZMQ, they got their HIV game, creating awareness in India and Africa, on 42 million devices, embedded on the device. And again, it's not an iPhone, it's not a luxury phone. These are very simple phones that everybody has in India, and some of them don't even have internet access, just mobile access.
But was that through Bharti or Tata?
There are 10 mobile operators, and they got like 8 of the 10.
They did. That's fantastic.
I mean, it started with one, and it was so successful that others just wanted to be part of it.
Yeah.
But it's one example, and we see it more and more.
Right. Eric, what's your take on this in terms of mobile adoption of Games for Change?
I think that mobile has always been a very difficult platform to develop, for which to develop games, because there have been very few standards, and so developing mobile games meant that you had to spend about 20% of your budget on making the initial game. So the question is, if you're in a store with full of shelves and there's only one of each thing on each shelf, right? So how are people ever going to find your game? So I think in that sense, thinking about marketing and distribution and reaching your audiences is as important as anything else. And I think the story that Asi told is it's about partnering with mobile phone carriers, right? So being strategic about not just the platform, but how you're going to have people find the game on the platform needs to be a key part of the conception of the game from the start, if what you want to do is have a big impact and have lots of people see your game.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for us, the internet and the browser are our primary mechanisms, but we care about mobile, and so our approach there is to use mobile to extend the experience. So if you have, again, we have game worlds that can be server-based and browser-based so that they can be persistent. So we can play in a multiplayer game, and then on the bus ride home, I can't go back and maybe play all of the things that I could do in the game, but I could buy some more inventory, I could customize my avatar, I could do some text-based things. So what we use is as a device to extend the experience for when you're not necessarily plugged into the internet. Or then if you have an internet-enabled phone, you can do that much more of the game experience.
One more comment on mobile. If you look at Foursquare, for example, Foursquare, the idea of going to coffee shops.
A fine New York venture, by the way.
Right. Coffee shops and restaurants and checking in and getting points. Mobile brings the whole idea of metagaming. So it's not really a game, but it behaves like a game. And it creates real-world action or location-based action that is rewarded like a game, which is another interesting concept you see on mobile.
Yeah, and I think that's an example of where the crowd sort of takes this, because it's not inherently clear where an application like that goes, but being hyper-local and making it a game where you can become the mayor of a certain location. I could become the mayor of the Lang Center by checking in most. Why I would want to do that, I don't know, but gives me some hegemony or whatever. This is my thoroughfare, right? And now my last question before I turn it over to you for questions is about casual gaming. We haven't talked a lot about casual gaming, and I'm just wondering what the panelists think of casual gaming in the context of Games for Change. Whether it's something like, I mean, obviously they're long-standing casual games like solitaire or other things that you know, are enjoyed on many different platforms. But I'm just curious, you know, what you're looking at on that side, something that's maybe a little less complex or detailed that might have the capacity to bring about you know, a certain agenda.
The interesting thing is that casual gaming in the past, we were talking about those games that are, you know, very casual in the approach of the user, and in terms of time investment are very short. But they were one time, or you know, people played them for 2 weeks or a month, like on the iPhone, and left them. What we see now with the casual / social media games is that they're casual, but it's 10 minutes a day for a very long period. So in a way, the time investment is still casual, but the engagement and the depth over time could be much more than something like Peacemaker or your games, because it's like really part of your life for a very long time.
Right, right. So that's almost getting to the subgenre of addictive games or addicting games, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's
possibly
probably the most addicting game you can think about.
Right.
Yeah.
Eric, what do you think there?
Yeah, I agree with Ossie. I think that, I mean, casual is used in a lot of different ways. I never like to call my own work casual, even though games like Diner Dash helped invent the category of casual games, because what musician says, I do casual music, right? But I do think that I'm happy that... Yeah,
serious music.
Well, serious music, some musicians do. I think that I'm happy that the audience is growing, and I think that it represents more opportunities for people to you know, to make games that for more cheaply that will be played by more people.
Yeah.
And we don't do casual games per se. We have mini games baked into our larger game experiences. But I think Ozzy hit on a really important point, and that is this idea of persistence. And when you're web enabled and you're in part of a social network, you have, if the game can remember when you come back where you left off or what your score was or what level you are, but it's a web-based game and you can keep coming back to it. I think so many of us now live our lives where we do so many things in 15-minute increments throughout the course of the day, and social networks do just that. You know, you get some ping, you respond to it, and I think it's one of the things we enabled in Making History 2. That game you can play for 60 or 70 hours, but you can also play it for 10 minutes a day because the game is saved on a server.
This is the one with Neil Ferguson, right?
Yeah.
And that's out May 25th, you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for the plug. But the idea that, because we didn't want people thinking, oh, I can't play this unless I can sit down and play it for 4 straight hours at a time.
This isn't like EverQuest, you know, where somebody's drinking Jolt Cola in their underwear at 3 a.m. after 9 hours of, you know.
They could be if they wanted to play it that way, but we've also made it so you can save the state of the game and play asynchronously, where we can each take a turn every now and then, and the game will wait until everyone's taken their turn and then progress. So you can play it over long periods of time. And that gives people, I think it's important to make sure that games can adapt to people's lifestyles.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm going to have to get that one.
I'm Anne-Marie Cunningham, and this is Carl Flato, and we're from Science Friday on NPR. And Dave, I wanted to ask you if you would tell us a bit more about your DARPA project and the science game. And I would love it if you two would jump in with any thoughts you have about games involving science. Dave, you said that it's important for kids to start owning the material and developing their own strategies. And I was wondering how you're managing to do that around science, which is so factual.
Yeah, so what we've aimed to do is build a lot of games that deal with 8th grade outcomes. So what kids get in middle school in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, they get a very broad sort of survey of science. They get earth science, physical science, and life science. Not very deep, but they cover a lot of different things. And then at the end of 8th grade, pretty much every state mandates a test that will test, you know, what you learned over the past 3 years. So what we wanted to build was, we didn't want to develop curriculum. What we wanted to develop were game experiences that would allow kids to either get refreshed with the material, play with the material, and when you have all those different types of sciences, and we're actually still in the middle of this project, so it's not complete. We've mapped out the 68-odd learning objectives that have to get covered, and then we've focused on what are the big ideas and the larger system kind of issues that kids deal with those, and we're building game mechanics that not just one, you're not going to teach each learning objective one at a time. So convection is a, whether it's dealing with convection in the Earth's core, in the mantle and the crust, or whether it's convection in the atmosphere that creates, rain and atmospheric events. Though we're using those kinds of systems to build game mechanics, so the kids can experience things rather, because science is so much about experiencing things. And there are a lot of things that kids want to do in a lab that they can't do in real life. How many electron microscopes are there in public high schools in this country? Not many. There are some, but not many. So we can build little game things where you need to use an electron microscope, but we can give you a virtual one in the world. You can emulate that and do those things. You can look at things at the molecular level, submolecular level. So we focus on things that kids that either are difficult or dangerous or expensive to do in class, and chemistry is full of those examples, where we give them a safe, controlled environment. But we also incorporate whatever it is they're doing. It's very important to us that the game mechanic reinforces the learning or the skill that they need. Some of the skills are about inquiry, or about measuring, or about reading graphs and making hypotheses. So we build game mechanics that reinforce those. And largely the game experiences are designed to look like labs. So they're practical applications of the material that you learn in class out of the textbook or from the teacher's lecture. So it'll be a series of 12 to 30 different game, small game experiences, probably stitched together with a larger narrative.
I think there's a wonderful synergy between games and science, largely because although I'm not a scientist, my understanding of science is that science is really a process, and it's a process of inquiry, it's a process of experimentation, it's a process of validation, it's a process of conversation with peers, and I think that games are a process, and there's a wonderful history of games that investigate science, and I'm thinking of, for example, the games that came out of Maxis that Will Wright designed, like Sim Earth and Sim Ant, and even Sim City, if one thinks of urban design as a science as well. So I think that in that sense, that what games are really best at is giving us a context where we can investigate something, push and pull at its parameters and see what happens, right? We can simulate something and see what happens and follow our curiosity. They could be a wonderful way of integration with science as a whole. Learning theorists like James Paul G., who looks at not educational games but any games, sees them as the ideal learning contexts in a way that they give you real-time feedback and respond with an appropriate level of difficulty as to where the learner is, and in dozens of other ways. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of potential there.
What are the challenges or hurdles of being a for-profit company when you're soliciting grants, loans, whether federal government or NGOs? I mean, I don't know how that works.
So it depends on which program you go for. So the DARPA project that we're doing is an SBIR, which stands for Small Business Innovation Research Grant, and that specifically is intended to develop a commercial product. So part of the grant, there was a two-phase. There was a research phase, which we did, and then got phase 2, which is the development phase. And when you're applying for phase 2, you have to identify what's your commercialization strategy. What's your distribution channel, who your partner's going to be, how you're going to monetize this. So we had to write a whole business plan as part of that one. The NIH NIDA grant is, that's an STTR, which I can't remember what that stands for. And that one,
transfer.
What's that?
The technology
transfer. So that one also, you can be a for-profit company, but then there's a third one that we're applying for where we have to be the sub. You cannot be a for-profit company. And that's under, I think it's an NSF grant. So someone's brought us in as the game developer. We're not applying for the grant, but they're the subject matter experts. And that's in juvenile criminal justice is where that program is.
And my best advice there is just to cultivate relationships with universities and nonprofit organizations that are already interested in games. I ran a commercial company for 9 years, and we never learned how to, apply for grants, but we partnered with a lot of organizations that knew a lot about that.
Yeah, also with Impact Games, we got a grant from a big foundation. It was done with Carnegie Mellon University. Right. Obviously, the partner brings meaningful, value to the project, research, education that we don't necessarily have at that capacity.
What do you think the responsibilities or maybe aspirations should be for games for fun developers in terms of developing smart game mechanics to encourage smart thinking? just in everyday gameplay, as opposed to maybe more mindless mechanics that could become very popular and addictive. So,
I'm not a big fan of the whole mindless mechanics, because I think that even in the most basic first-person shooter, this experience is crafted, and there is a lot of problem solving. Even the most basic level requires the player to think, to plan, to scope, etc. So, you know, every game has some meaning, even if it's a first-person shooter, and gets all the criticism. In terms of the industry, the commercial industry, I mean, I think that they should make games that are fun, engaging, and make people buy them. The one thing I would wish to see, though, is more diversity, and to think beyond the notion of a gamer that we had, like, you know, in the last years. And that means that just like you think about films or books, no one is a book reader, right? Everyone is a book reader. Same with films. I mean, you can be a kid and enjoy a film. You can be an adult, and you can be the grandfather of that kid and watch movies that would be directed to your taste and interests. So I wish that games could be like that, and I think that they're becoming more and more. All tastes, all both genders, all different audiences and interests, and I do want to see games that will make you cry as well. I know that maybe Eric wouldn't like
games for crying. Yes.
Games that will make you, that will be so meaningful, just like you watch a movie and shed a tear. I mean, that you could do it by playing a game. Why not?
Okay. Well, my disagreement with that is that I don't think that games should try and bark up the tree of the pleasures that other media fulfill. Games have their own unique sorts of pleasures that might not resemble the pleasures we gain from other media. That said, I mean, I agree with Asi. In part, mindfulness is the responsibility of the player, as much as it is in the responsibility of the people that are creating the game. So I would agree that virtually any game can be played deeply and can be played meaningfully. It depends on how you play it. I mean, you know, tic-tac-toe is a solved problem if two adults are playing, but it's a wonderful context for an adult to teach a young child about strategy and logical thinking and problem solving, for example. So it's, you know, it's as much about the context of play as it is about the game itself. But I would completely agree that I think that games are an incredibly plastic medium in terms of what we can represent on the screen or off the screen, and the kinds of experiences, subject matters, and gameplay and aesthetics that games can embody. So we've really seen a very narrow slice of everything that games can that games can be. And I think that in part that's because games became commercialized very early in their history and very genreified
and successful.
And there was a movement maybe 8 or 10 years ago when people really didn't know if games were just going to keep on getting bigger and more like Hollywood without independent cinema. But I think that what we've seen in the last few years is the proliferation of platforms that permit the creation and distribution of games more cheaply, which is good for games. And so that games are always going to have a center, but they also need their margins where things are played with and experimented with, and new ideas are found.
We work a lot with nonprofit archives who would like to, audiovisual archives, who would like to provide their material to K-12 students around the country, but the archives themselves are very poorly tagged. And they would love sort of a magic bullet that would allow them to get a rabid fan or rabid fans to help build, to help surface meaning out of the chaos of the archive. And I was wondering if you had any examples of people who were doing that effectively.
Well, if the classic example of that is Google's ESP game.
Yeah. Right. That's the one I'm most familiar with.
Right.
I'm looking for the next one beyond that. Yeah, but is there other examples of people competing like that?
Another interesting example that I know from the last month is The Extraordinaries on iPhone. Did you hear about it? Yeah. It's an iPhone app. It's called The Extraordinaries, and all it does, it lets people spend their time waiting for the bus. You know, those 5 minutes, tagging things, helping nonprofits, and get points for it. They're tagging pictures, they're proofing spelling. I mean, all kinds of activities. You choose your cause, you choose your nonprofit, and you get like the meta-gaming points for it.
Wow.
It's very cool.
Hey, Eric, can you explain to the audience what the Google ESP game is?
Yeah, briefly, the Google ESP game was a way that Google wanted to use crowdsourcing to make their knowledge about images more intelligent. So the way it worked was that you were shown an image and you had to start typing in, I believe I'm getting this right, you had to start typing in words, the first words that came to your mind.
And you're matched with an
when you saw, and you're matched with another person who had done the same thing on the same image, and you got points when your words matched their words. So not only were you giving Google your first impressions of an image, but you furthermore were specifically trying to think about what were the sort of lowest common denominator words that other people would think of. And it did, in a funny way, it did give you an experience of kind of mind meld with a person that you were never going to meet. You would say, wow, we both thought of the word, incongruous when we saw this weird image of someone who was, dressed in clashing clothing or something like that. So and that's also a great example of an experience that another cultural form probably isn't going to give you, right? A weird experience of coming into sync with the thinking of another of another person, right? So that's just a quick example of the kind of amazing pleasures and experiences that games can provide. But it's a very cool idea, and I think that that it sounds like Asi located the game you needed to.
Yeah.
I produce a show called Bollywood to Hollywood on MNN channel.
Yeah.
I have a question. I was involved against the caste system in India, so I wrote a play about Gandhi's Children of God. After listening to you, I'm getting an idea. Perhaps we can put it as a game, as a Dalits on the game, and there is a big 300 million people, Dalits in India, and Americans don't know anything about it, so maybe they could be educated as well. So basically, my question is, what is the cost involved to produce a game like this? A minimum basic denominator.
So two thoughts on that. The first one is, and again, I don't know if you'll agree with me, it's a provocative thought. Everything could be turned, any subject, I think, could be turned into a game. I mean, different approaches, different genres, but I mean, I think that anything could make a good game if done right. The second one is, if you remember, we talked about platforms. So your question is a question we get a lot. So how much is going to be? And how fast can we do it? And we always say, wait. Take a step back. Let's do the time it takes to understand what you want to achieve, who's your audience, and other questions like that, and only then decide. Because if the platform is iPhone, it will cost you maybe 50 to 100. But if you want to make a Nintendo game, it can be millions. So, it all depends on what you're trying to achieve, who you're trying to target, and how you want to distribute it, etc.
Excellent. Very patient man in the front row here.
My name is Donald Schwartz, and I'm a technical journalist. This is sort of a question involving, I don't know whether it's Eric's area but involving games, they all have a competitive element to them. Now, if you're making a game that's dealing with peace and cooperation, what role, if any, or how do you modify the competitive feature of the gameplay, or do you want to give it free form, and that's part of what makes the game exciting? I know Eric talked about that in a workshop that I took, and now I've been thinking about it.
Well, it's true that one of the things about games is that they are context for conflict.
Right.
So conflict occurs in games, whether that conflict is one player against another player, a team against each other, or players cooperating together to overcome the challenges that the game provides them as the system of the game. At the same time that every game is about conflict, every game is also intrinsically cooperative. So if you and I sit down to play a game of chess together, we are in essence agreeing to speak the language of chess to each other, which is a wonderful human act of communication and cooperation that we're going to go to such trouble to spend half an hour or more moving little pieces around on a board and not cheating and enjoying the pleasure of the game. In essence, expressing ourselves through this very mathematical language of chess. So in that sense, I think that games are also cooperative. I would say that a lot of people moving into the educational or social change space often are put off by the competitiveness of games. But sometimes when that's removed from a game idea or a game project, you're sort of cutting off your nose to spite your face. That you really need to embrace the gameness of games, and the competitiveness of games is part of the excitement and engagement that they bring. So I would, conflict is not a bad thing. The thing that makes game conflict interesting is that it's artificial conflict. It's like saying that, well, there shouldn't be instances of conflict or violence in books or other sorts of linear media. Of course it needs to be there. And of course, even studies have shown that even the youngest children understand the difference between fantasy and reality and are much more spooked, for example, by violence in news at an age of 3 or 4 than they are by violence in narrative media. So I think that one needs to embrace those forms of conflict. If anything in a game, one has much more cognizance of the constructed nature of the experience. And in that sense, in my opinion, games are much safer than other media in terms of dealing with difficult and violent issues, for example.
Yeah, great, thanks. Gary Greenblatt.
Gary Greenblatt, I'm part of the Producers Guild. I have a middle schooler, and I just wanted to touch, somebody talked about the other games, and they are everywhere. I mean, they're on every screen. I will put down my phone, and my son will have it 2 seconds later. I'll tell him to put it down, and suddenly the TV's on with the PS3. I mean, then he goes to the computer to work on homework, and he's playing a game. And my question is like, I mean, middle schoolers and younger, kids, I mean, they love games. And it's almost like there's so many opportunities that should it be in the classrooms, and how do you say, okay, this is game time, this is good, but if you pull out your cell phone now and start playing, that's bad. I mean, how do we, what's the line between too much games? Maybe we shouldn't be playing games in school, and maybe we should be picking up a book. I sound like my dad. I can't believe it, but
I mean, I think that right now it's not even close to that. I mean, you're talking about classrooms that are managed like they were managed dozens of years ago. It's not that, there are many examples of games in schools. I mean, people that bought PEACEMAKER for schools, and we had a lot of teachers in America and Europe, they were early adopters. They fought very hard with the administration system to get the funding. They had 1 week, 1 hour a week of the kids in front of a computer. So we're far from even testing for real what it means to integrate games into the school. And I think that this gap that you're talking about, your kids speaking one vocabulary, right? Being with those devices at home and going to school and like going back in a time machine and reading books, something is not right there, right? Again, it's not that I have the solution, but it's definitely by exploring and testing more games in the classroom. That's what I think.
And I would argue what's so great about someone just sitting in a chair and listening to a teacher talk, and frankly, that kid's probably looking out the window. It's really about motivation, and I think that I've got a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I too worry about, geez, are they, sort of the whole screen time thing, and I had to, build my kid a wheel of life and said, you've got this much time for games and this much time for exercise and this much time for doing the dishes, and so they do need some balance, because I worry about things like vision, right. But if you go back to games 20 years ago, I think there was this issue of sort of mindless escapist play, but now things are so much more social. They play them in smaller time slices, and I think a lot of them, there is a lot of reading and literacy involved in games. A lot of good games have good stories with them, right, that the kids are reading in. So it's absolutely a balance. And I wouldn't worry about them playing too much in school, but I think we do sometimes unfairly hold it up to comparisons of books are bad, movies are bad, everything that we seem to like to do. Who wrote that, right? Everything bad is good for you.
Right. Oh yeah, Stephen Johnson, right?
Stephen Johnson's book. So I think with time, people will learn to sort of balance them and use them appropriately.
Media theorists like Henry Jenkins, for example, have studied children's play over the last 100 years, and one of his observations is that 100 years ago, boys, for example, that are junior high school age today, did a lot of their play outside the home. They would leave home, they would go play outside, and they would engage in, for example, incredibly violent, and isolating forms of play. Whether or not that play was good or bad for you, the truth is that many more kids are now in urban spaces, and urban spaces don't provide kids as many opportunities to go off and play on their own. So a lot of that childhood play is happening literally in front of their parents, or under the noses of their parents, or in the next room. So I think that's part of what's going on, is that more and more parents are observing a lot of that childhood play.
Well, I'm actually a student at Quest, which is a school that actually Eric helped create with the Institute of Play. And I'm interested because I use GameStar Mechanic as how the educational model will evolve over the next few years in other schools.
So your question was, how are things evolve? Well, when I mentioned this sort of educational policies, I think that part of the challenge is that with school funding now tied so much to standardized test scores, there's less and less room for teachers to want to do experimental things in their classroom and try and set aside time for things that are not directly related to test taking. At the same time, I think that, as I mentioned, I think that the literacy skills that can be conveyed through technology and games are increasingly important, and I think that that there's an interesting tension there, and it's interesting, David, to hear you say that you're finding it easier to bring games into schools, that at least the teachers on a cultural level are less against it, and I think that every day I talk to someone who's part of a nonprofit who wants to reinvent schools. I think that's probably something that's going to happen. And I think that you're helping to do that by attending the Quest to Learn schools. So we can only hope that things will change for the better.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that's going to be a wrap from here.